Imagine discovering that the person you trusted most was living a double life, and their betrayal was deeper than you ever imagined. Reflecting on where I am now, I struggle to understand how things fell apart so completely. My relationship with Melissa was something I once believed to be unbreakable, a love so deep that I thought nothing in the world could challenge it. We met during a time when life felt full of endless possibilities, her laughter lighting up my days, and her kindness shaping my world. I truly believed we could face anything together. When we got married, I felt like the luckiest man alive, certain that no force could ever drive us apart. But now, looking back, I realize that life has a way of testing even the most steadfast hearts, often in ways that we can't anticipate. If there were signs, I must have overlooked them entirely. For 10 years, I gave Melissa everything I had, working to build a life I thought we both treasured. We shared dreams, made plans, and envisioned a future as bright as any couple could. But life had other plans for us. In quieter moments, I find myself wondering if there was something more I could have done, a different path I could have chosen to avoid the heartache that came later. Looking back now, I can see that the person I loved so deeply had been hiding things from me, secrets that would eventually shatter my world. It started on a night like any other. I came home earlier than expected, and an email notification on Melissa's laptop stopped me cold. For years, I had trusted her without question, never once doubting her loyalty. But that email was the first domino to fall. There had been other moments too, ones that seemed innocuous at the time but now stand out with glaring clarity. I remember a company holiday party where I saw Melissa sharing a private moment with a coworker, her expression more vulnerable than I'd ever seen. Later, I spotted her car parked outside a motel, with an excuse that barely held together. These small incidents were breadcrumbs leading to the undeniable truth: our marriage wasn't what I believed it to be. I was so blinded by my love for Melissa that it took undeniable evidence to see what had been happening. Over the last 6 months, she had been involved with someone else, and I had no idea. Melissa and I first met during our sophomore year of college. We were drawn to each other immediately. She had this energy that was impossible to ignore. Her warm brown hair, hazel eyes, and easy grace were what initially caught my attention. But what truly captivated me was her intelligence, humor, and a zest for life that made everything seem brighter. We could talk for hours about anything, losing ourselves in conversation. She wasn't just the woman I loved, she was my best friend. After 3 months of dating, we had already reached a level of connection that felt unshakable. My name is Logan West, most people just call me Logan, and back then, I believed Melissa was my forever. Now, I'm left questioning if any of it was ever real. I was born and raised in a quiet, medium-sized town in the Midwest. Standing at 6 feet tall and weighing 187 pounds, people often tell me I'm a decent-looking guy, with sandy brown hair and brown eyes. I run a small contracting business that specializes in high-end interior remodeling for clients who value quality craftsmanship. With a permanent staff of 5, we keep busy year-round, though our workload peaks in spring, summer, and fall. Melissa, my wife, teaches music at the local high school, and together we've built a comfortable life. We own a beautiful home, and since we're both in our 30s, starting a family was next on our list of plans. For the first 10 years of our marriage, I genuinely believed I had it all. Every night, Melissa and I had a ritual, cuddling before bed, a small tradition that felt like the cornerstone of our bond. Every morning, I'd wake up next to her, marveling at her beauty and wondering how I'd gotten so lucky. I loved her so deeply that I could honestly say I would have given my life for her without hesitation. But I suppose that's a sentiment I should put in the past tense. Something happened, something so unexpected and devastating, that I still don't think I've fully processed it. As a contractor, my busiest seasons are spring through fall. Winters here are harsh, with temperatures often dipping below freezing and snow piling up by the feet. Most people don't want their homes torn apart for renovations in the dead of winter, so Melissa and I usually plan our vacations around Christmas, New Year's, or spring break. Summers, when work is at its peak, Melissa would sometimes take trips solo, to visit family, shop with her two sisters, or take additional teaching courses. Our favorite winter tradition, though, was escaping to somewhere warm. That year, we had planned something special, a 2-week all-inclusive trip to a resort in the Bahamas. Just the two of us, away from the bitter cold, to reconnect and recharge. At least, that's what I'd hoped for. Little did I know how quickly those hopes would be dashed. The trip started like any other. We arrived at the Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport, joining the long line of travelers eager to trade icy winds for tropical breezes. While we stood in line for security, I noticed a man in the adjacent queue glancing at Melissa. This wasn't particularly unusual. Melissa is stunning, and she often turned heads. But this felt different. His glances were frequent and deliberate, as if he was trying to catch her attention. Curious, I pretended to check my boarding pass, keeping him in my peripheral vision. His attention toward her felt unsettling, but I brushed it off, telling myself it was nothing. Melissa didn't seem to notice him, or at least, she didn't let on that she did. Our flight from Minneapolis to Miami was long, and typically I'd use the time to catch up on sleep. But this time, I was too tense, my thoughts circling back to that man from the security line. As we settled into our seats, I pulled my twin's cap low over my eyes, pretending to nap while keeping an eye on Melissa. About 15 minutes into the flight, I saw her glance my way, checking if I was asleep. Then she quietly got up, leaving her seat. I couldn't help but wonder where she was going. Normally, she'd mention needing to stretch or use the restroom. This silence felt off. The pit in my stomach only deepened and we landed in Miami to switch planes for our connecting flight to Nassau. And there he was. 5 rows behind us, flipping through an in-flight magazine as if he hadn't a care in the world. He didn't acknowledge us, and Melissa didn't seem to notice, or so I thought. But something gnawed at me. The coincidence of his presence felt too deliberate to ignore. I couldn't shake the sinking feeling that this trip, meant to strengthen our bond, might unravel everything I thought I knew about my wife. The flight to Nassau was uneventful, at least outwardly. Melissa returned to her usual window seat, her earlier unease replaced by an unusual calm. Once we landed, we gathered our luggage, rented a car, and headed to the resort. I tried to focus on the beauty of the island and the excitement of 2 weeks in paradise with the woman I loved. But that nagging feeling stayed with me, casting a shadow over what should have been the trip of a lifetime. I noticed Melissa acting strangely as the day went on. There was something off about her demeanor, something guarded. Normally, she'd meet my gaze when we spoke, her warm brown eyes full of light. But now, she avoided my glance, staring down at the floor instead. In that moment, a cold, terrifying realization settled over me. I might have already lost her. It wasn't just her attention I'd lost, it was her heart. Had she already given it to someone else? The thought hit me like a punch to the gut. My mind raced as I turned away, heading quickly to the bathroom. I didn't want her to see the pain etched across my face. Sitting on the cold tile floor, I fought to keep my emotions under control. Questions swirled relentlessly in my head. How had this happened? What did I do to drive her into someone else's arms? Was there anything I could do to fix it? The longer I sat there, the clearer the answers became. Melissa wasn't pulling away because of something I'd done. It was deliberate. She was creating distance between us, likely to spend more time with him. And if that was true, then she wasn't the woman I thought I had married. A wave of nausea swept over me as I tried to make sense of it all. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed her cell phone lying on the nightstand next to the TV. It called to me, whispering a cruel promise, the truth is in there. On impulse, I picked it up. My hands trembled as I pressed the screen, uncertain if she had changed the passcode. To my surprise, she hadn't. The phone unlocked easily. For a moment, I stared at the screen, hesitant to dig further. But then I saw the name, Anthony Eisner. A string of recent messages sat at the top of the chat. With a heavy heart, I scrolled back to the beginning of their conversation. One of the first messages made my blood run cold. Anthony, now you have a chance to give me your baby, which Logan will think is his. Melissa, Anthony, you're so mean, but I love it. My vision blurred with rage. The phone shook in my hand, bile rising in my throat. Each word confirmed the betrayal I had desperately hoped wasn't real. This trip, which I had naively believed would bring us closer, wasn't about reconnecting. It was her carefully planned getaway to solidify her betrayal with Anthony. I clenched her phone tightly, considering smashing it against the wall. But no, I needed those messages. They were proof, evidence for the divorce that now seemed inevitable. Still trembling, I placed the phone back where I found it and forced myself to return to the bathroom to collect my thoughts. Minutes later, Melissa called out, her voice sounding as sweet and calm as ever, I brought you some water. We need to stay hydrated in this heat. My stomach churned. Water? Why now? The resort has bottled water in the room. Then it hit me. She wasn't just betraying me emotionally, she was trying to drug me. Was this so she could sneak off without fear of me waking up? I thought quickly. If I refused the water outright, she'd know something was up. If I drank it and my suspicions were correct, I'd be out cold, leaving her free to do whatever she wanted. I turned off the shower and dried off slowly, trying to buy time. When I stepped out, Melissa stood there holding the glass, a practiced smile on her face. Here, she said softly. Thanks, I replied, masking the fury building inside me. I took a small sip, careful not to drink too much, and feigned sleepiness. Later that evening, I pretended to fall asleep early. Melissa, now wearing the stunning red dress I had always loved, was clearly dressing up for someone else. She'd smiled as she zipped it up, telling me, it's been a while since I've worn this. I thought I'd give it another spin. Her voice sounded casual, but the context made my blood boil. Feigning exhaustion, I let my head fall back and pretended to doze off. From the corner of my eye, I saw her grab her phone and make a call. I can't wait to see you, she whispered, her voice dripping with excitement. I'll meet you at the bar in half an hour. Love you. I stayed perfectly still, watching as she finished getting ready. When she stepped into the bathroom to shower, I seized the opportunity to search her purse. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for, a small bottle of pills. Later, I followed her. The resort bar wasn't crowded, making it easy to spot Melissa in her red dress. She was seated at a corner table with Anthony, who wrapped his arms around her the moment she arrived. Every ounce of anger I'd buried surged to the surface, but I forced myself to stay rooted in place, watching as my world continued to unravel before my eyes. I had to remind myself why I was really there, to collect evidence, not to let my anger drive me to do something reckless. My phone was in my hand, discreetly recording everything, their flirtatious touches, their laughter, their kisses. They looked exactly like two lovers on a romantic getaway, completely oblivious to the world around them. Watching them made my stomach turn. At one point, Melissa's voice broke through their bubble of intimacy, tinged with concern. Do you think he'll wake up? She asked Anthony softly. Don't worry about him, baby, he reassured her, a smirk on his face. He'll be out for at least 6 hours. He might wake up with a headache, but that's it. You only used one pill, right? She pressed, her tone uneasy. Yeah, just one, Anthony confirmed. Why? What would 2 do? Her voice dropped to a whisper. 2 would knock him out for 12 hours or more. Anthony laughed lightly. Relax. Just give him 1 before bed, and we can be together every night. I want you to be pregnant by the time we leave. That was it, the confirmation I needed. My hands shook as I recorded, the bile rising in my throat again. Anthony leaned in and handed her something I couldn't quite see. The intimate confidence they shared was more than just an affair, it was a blatant betrayal of everything I thought my marriage stood for. I knew I needed a plan, a way to gather more proof. My anger was like a pressure cooker, threatening to blow, but I had to stay composed. If I let my emotions control me now, I'd lose my chance to expose them for what they were. The next morning, around 5 a.m., Melissa quietly slipped back into our room. She moved with practiced ease, changing clothes and sliding into bed beside me as if nothing had happened. She even snuggled close, feigning innocence. My heart pounded as I lay still, pretending to sleep. When she stirred, I greeted her with calculated affection. "Good morning, sleepyhead," I murmured, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "I'm sorry about last night. I fell asleep and ruined our dinner plans, but I have a surprise for you." Her groggy smile barely masked her guilt. "What kind of surprise?" "I booked you a spa day to make up for it." "I wanted to show you how much I love you," I replied, hiding the bitterness beneath my words. She lit up just enough to play along. "That's so sweet," she said. Little did she know, the spa day was my cover, a way to keep her occupied while I continued my investigation. An hour later, we were at the buffet. Melissa barely touched her plate, poking at a few pieces of fruit and sipping her coffee absently. "Not hungry, babe?" I asked casually, watching her every move. "Is it that time of the month?" She avoided my eyes and muttered, "Yeah, I guess so. Just not feeling up to eating." I couldn't help but wonder if her distraction was because of him. Was she replaying their night together in her head? Were they already planning their next rendezvous? It didn't matter. I was 2 steps ahead now. After breakfast, while Melissa headed off to the spa, I set my plan into motion. Earlier, I had purchased a small, discreet camera and decided to place it on the window ledge of our room, aimed to capture everything happening inside. Once it was positioned, I found a spot down the walkway where I could observe the room and the door. I waited, patience becoming my strongest weapon. Eventually, my vigilance paid off. 2 women I recognized from a conversation Anthony had earlier appeared, accompanied by 2 large men who looked like they could have been NFL players. As they drew closer to the room, I overheard bits of their conversation. One of the women said something about being stuck at the hotel, while the men brushed it off, promising to be back by dinner. Their casual chatter seemed unrelated, but I kept recording everything. Time was my ally now. The pieces of Melissa's betrayal were coming together, and with every step, I was closer to the truth, and the reckoning they both deserved. Earlier that day, I had spotted Anthony lounging by the pool with the same 2 women I'd seen him with on the beach. Later, I saw them again, leaving his room in the company of 2 massive guys who looked like they could bench press a truck. They were all laughing as if sharing some private joke. As soon as they were out of sight, I retrieved my camera from its hidden perch and returned to my room. Melissa was still at the spa, giving me time to execute my plan. I reviewed the footage and made 2 copies of Anthony's escapades, then backed everything up on a separate DVR just in case. I mailed one of the discs to my brother Frank, including a note asking him not to play it or tell anyone about it unless something went wrong. It wasn't paranoia, it was caution. If Melissa or Anthony realized what I was doing, I needed insurance. The timing was crucial. Checking my watch, I calculated that Melissa would soon be wrapping up at the spa. I took a stroll around the resort to locate the rooms of the 2 women who had been with Anthony earlier, noting their room numbers. They could prove useful later. I knew their boyfriends would likely find my evidence, if I left it correctly placed, and their reactions would play right into my plan. The idea was simple but devastating. First, I would ensure that Anthony and Melissa's evening plans didn't go as expected. Second, I would expose Anthony's betrayals to the women's boyfriends. Finally, I'd make sure Anthony couldn't flee the consequences. Back in the room, Melissa was full of her usual practice charm. "We have that dinner reservation tonight," she said, her tone sweet but with a glint of excitement that I knew wasn't meant for me. "Of course," I replied casually. "But let me use the bathroom first." I took the opportunity to empty a small bottle of Melissa's favorite moisturizer and refill it with water from a nearby bottle, giving her no reason to suspect anything as I flushed the toilet for cover. Once back in the room, I sipped my drink and pretended to feel sleepy, feigning a loud snore as Melissa got ready for her date. Once she was in the shower, I grabbed her phone and scanned for anything new. The messages from Anthony confirmed their plans, with him saying, "Can't wait for tonight, baby. It's going to be perfect." My jaw tightened, but I stayed focused. Melissa slipped out later in the evening, dressed to the nines, and I followed at a safe distance. I found a vantage point like the night before, my camera ready to capture her meeting with Anthony. As expected, they were seated at a secluded table, their conversation punctuated with laughter and intimate touches. When it got late, I slipped away to the bar, ordered a beer, and kept a low profile while they remained engrossed in each other. When the night wore on, I watched Anthony and Melissa leave for his room. I waited a few minutes after they entered, then used the key card I'd taken from Melissa's purse earlier to follow them in. Inside, the scene was exactly as I had anticipated. Melissa was lying face down on the bed, clearly unconscious, while Anthony hovered over her, slurring his words. "What's wrong with you, babe?" he muttered, shaking her shoulder. "You didn't drink that much." That's when he noticed me. "Hey! Who the hell are you?" he demanded, staggering to his feet but barely managing to stay upright. "I'm her husband, idiot," I snapped. "Why don't you pass out so I can finish this?" Anthony stumbled, trying to respond, but the effects of whatever he had been drinking hit him hard, and he collapsed onto the floor. I didn't waste any time. Grabbing his wallet, cash, passport, and credit cards, I ensured he wouldn't be leaving the island anytime soon. I took everything, even his shoes, so he couldn't run without facing the consequences. Turning my attention to Melissa, I carefully rolled her onto her back and carried her back to our room, laying her gently on the bed. Once she was settled, I returned to Anthony's room to gather anything else of value he might have left behind. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about taking back control. Anthony wasn't going to charm or buy his way out of this, and Melissa would wake up to find that her carefully constructed lies had finally unraveled. As I sat down after everything I'd done, exhaustion hit me like a freight train. But I couldn't let my guard down. I had to start planning my next steps. The sham of a marriage Melissa and I had been living in was over, and I was determined to cut ties completely. My mind raced with thoughts of emptying our bank accounts, canceling credit cards, and moving out of the house before she could return. I didn't want her to have even a moment to manipulate me into staying. Before I knew it, I dozed off in the lounge chair, waking up to find it was already 7 a.m. I carried Melissa, still unconscious from the night before, out of the room and placed her gently on a poolside lounge chair. I didn't want her in the room when she woke up, and I certainly didn't want to be there to face her. As I left, a mixture of satisfaction and apprehension churned inside me. I wondered briefly what would become of Anthony. I didn't have to wonder long. Moments later, I heard sirens. Looking back, I saw paramedics entering the building, led by the resort superintendent. A crowd began gathering near Anthony's room as they wheeled him out. I hoped he'd be okay, though I wasn't losing sleep over it. I slipped out of the resort unnoticed and caught a cab to the airport. Turning on my phone, I found a voicemail from my brother, Frank. "Logan, what the hell is going on over there? I got some pictures of Melissa. Do you know about this?" My stomach tightened. Frank must have received the evidence I sent, though it sounded like he hadn't read the note explaining everything yet. Still, it was a reminder of how deeply Melissa's betrayal had cut, not just me, but the life we'd built together. As the cab sped toward the airport, I thought about the reality of divorce. Melissa had destroyed our marriage, yet the thought of her walking away with half of everything we'd worked for didn't seem fair. A new plan began to form in my mind, something that would leave no doubt about who had wronged whom. When I landed back home, I called Frank to ask for his help moving out of the house. "I want to be gone before Melissa gets back," I told him. "She doesn't deserve the satisfaction of finding me there." Frank was hesitant at first but agreed to help. The next morning, he arrived with his truck, and we spent hours loading up my belongings, making trip after trip to a storage unit. By the end of the day, I was officially moved out. Frank asked what my next steps were, but I kept quiet about my larger plans. "I just want to get out of town and leave this nightmare behind me," I said, avoiding specifics. I knew he'd try to talk me out of what I had in mind, so I decided not to tell him. That night, I started working on the house. It wasn't a remodeling project in the traditional sense, this was about sending a message. A major snowstorm was rolling in, shutting down airports and delaying flights, which bought me more time to finish what I'd started. I worked through the night, driven by a mix of heartbreak and determination. Melissa's calls started coming in as the hours passed. At first, her voicemails were frantic. "Logan, where are you? Why did you leave me here? Are you okay? I think someone's robbed me." Then, as she realized the extent of what had happened, her tone shifted. "Why did you do this to me? Couldn't we have talked first?" "Why, Logan?" I ignored her calls, knowing that engaging would only give her more power. She'd already shattered my heart, I wasn't going to give her the chance to manipulate me. The next day, her desperation was palpable. "Logan, I'm begging you. Please let me come home, and we can talk about this. We can fix this, I swear. Our love can be stronger than ever if we just try." For a moment, I hesitated. Her voice sounded so genuine, so full of remorse. But then I remembered what I'd seen, her messages with Anthony, her betrayal, her planning to have a child that I'd think was mine. The memory hardened me. "I don't know, Melissa," I replied coldly. "I loved you, but you broke my heart. I don't think this is fixable." She started sobbing. "Please, Logan. Wait until I get home so we can talk. Please. I'll explain everything. When are you coming back?" I asked. She paused. "Well, there's a problem. I don't have a passport or a plane ticket anymore." I smirked at her predicament, though I kept my voice steady. "I don't know, Melissa. We'll see." Then I hung up. Melissa called me later with what she thought was good news. "I just found out I'm getting a new passport in a couple of days. Once I book a flight, I should be back in the afternoon. Logan, will you meet me at the airport? I really want us to talk as soon as possible." Her voice was hopeful, almost desperate, but I wasn't about to give her what she wanted. "That's not a good idea, Melissa," I said, keeping my tone calm. "Have your sister pick you up and bring you home. We can talk then." I wanted her to believe I was open to a conversation, even though I had no intention of being there when she arrived. My plans were already in motion. Early the next morning, I finished clearing out the house, leaving behind only the things that belonged to her. I loaded my remaining belongings into my truck, slipping out quietly so I wouldn't attract any attention. Before leaving, I asked a trusted neighbor to watch for Melissa's return and record her reaction. Driving away, I felt a strange calm begin to settle over me. The anger and heartbreak that had consumed me for days were fading, replaced by a sense of relief. I was leaving behind the weight of betrayal and stepping into a new chapter of my life. Around noon, Melissa called again. "I'll be home tomorrow," she said, trying to sound casual. "Can you pick me up? I want to talk." "I can't," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "I already have plans, but I'll be home later." Melissa's hopefulness didn't faze me, I knew the truth would hit her soon enough. I made sure my neighbor was prepared to document everything when she arrived. Later that day, I drove to Colorado, where I planned to stay with a close friend until I could sort out the next steps in my life. The fresh mountain air and distance from everything gave me the clarity I needed to move forward. Over time, the full extent of Melissa's deceit came to light. Encouraged by my brother, Frank, I agreed to a DNA test, which revealed that the child she had once hinted might be mine was, in fact, Anthony's. It was the final blow to any lingering doubts about my decision to leave her behind. My mother, once supportive of Melissa, was outraged by the betrayal and kicked her out of our family home. Anthony faced his own set of consequences and eventually left town, unable to face the fallout. Looking back now, those early years with Melissa feel like shadows, memories I once cherished but no longer allow to haunt me. I've rebuilt my life, and for the first time in years, I can breathe without the weight of her betrayal on my shoulders. In the end, I took back control. And with it, I found the strength to move forward and embrace a future free from lies. As Melissa's flight home drew closer, I made sure every detail of my plan was airtight. I wanted her to feel the weight of everything she had done. This wasn't just about leaving her behind, it was about taking back my life in the most decisive way possible. The morning of her return, I packed the last of my things into storage and left the house completely bare of anything meaningful to me. It was eerily quiet as I walked through the empty rooms, the echoes of laughter and memories now replaced by silence. The only things left were hers, clothes, photos, the life she had built while betraying me. Before I left, I made a final addition to the house, a letter, sitting conspicuously on the dining table. In it, I laid out everything I knew, her messages with Anthony, the nights she had planned behind my back, and the sickening conversations about making me believe her lies. I didn't write with anger, though. My words were calm, measured, and undeniable. I wanted her to understand that she had lost not just me, but every ounce of respect and love I had once felt for her. Then, I added one final surprise. Beneath the letter, I left the DVR disc with all the evidence of her escapades, every recorded moment of her betrayal. I wanted her to see it all, to confront the truth she had tried to hide. That afternoon, I got a call from my neighbor, the one who had agreed to watch the house. "She's here," he said, his voice low. "Looks like she just got dropped off. Want me to start recording?" "Yes," I replied, my voice steady. "Get everything." I hung up and let my mind picture the scene unfolding. Melissa stepping into the house, expecting to find me there, maybe even thinking we could reconcile. Instead, she'd find empty rooms and a letter that would hit her harder than anything I could ever say in person. Melissa's calls began again, this time more frantic. "Logan, what the hell is this? Where are you? Why is the house empty?" I didn't answer. The next voicemail was angrier. "Seriously? You think this is okay? Just running off and leaving me here like this? Grow up, Logan." Then, hours later, her tone shifted. "Logan, please. I made a mistake, okay? Can we just talk? I love you. We can fix this." I let them all go to voicemail, each one another nail in the coffin of her illusions. She didn't know where I was, and for the first time in years, I felt like I held all the power in our relationship. That night, I received the recording from my neighbor. Watching it, I couldn't help but smirk as Melissa stormed through the house, her confusion turning into panic as she realized I was gone for good. She picked up the letter and sat at the dining table, her hands trembling as she read it. When she got to the DVR, she hesitated, as if she already knew what it would contain. Eventually, curiosity, or guilt, won out. She pressed play. The footage showed everything, her laughing with Anthony at the bar, sneaking off to his room, their intimate moments at the pool and on the beach. Her face paled as she watched, her hands covering her mouth in horror. She turned off the video halfway through, unable to face the full extent of her actions. Then she broke down, sobbing uncontrollably in the empty house. The next few weeks were surprisingly quiet. I changed my phone number, blocked her on every platform, and moved to a new town to start fresh. I wanted no part of her life, no lingering threads tying me to the pain she had caused. But then, one day, I received a package in the mail. Inside was another letter, this time from Melissa. It was pages long, filled with apologies and excuses. She wrote about how lost she had felt, how Anthony had manipulated her, how she wanted to come clean but was too afraid. She begged for another chance, insisting she could be better, that we could rebuild. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I burned the letter, watching the flames consume her words. It was cathartic, a final release of the hold she had once had on me. Months turned into years, and I built a new life far away from the shadows of my past. The betrayal, once all-consuming, became a distant memory, a lesson in trust and resilience. I didn't know where Melissa ended up, and I didn't care. What mattered was that I had reclaimed my life. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free.